from the Deputy Attorney General and the Department of the Federal Bureau of Investigation explain these determinations in greater detail. It says, although the president is inclined to declassify this February 5 memo because it contains numerous properly classified and especially sensitive passages, he is unable to do so at this time. So, I mean, bringing back in our panel to sort of, as we get a little bit of a better sense of what's in here, this doesn't sound like this is a done deal at all, Guy.
Well, it's not, obviously. I'm a little bit confused as to why this has taken 5 days. If they got the memo 5 days ago, they looked at it, right? The DOJ could have said, here are our problems, X, Y, and Z. Let's redact these parts and then release it. I don't know why they waited and then said, well, 5 days later, now we can't do it. I'm inclined to agree with the president and with Molly. Let's get it out there. Obviously, we don't want to put anything at risk in terms of national security. I would point out, Molly referenced that letter, that referral from Senators Graham and Grassley. There was an initial version of that was published a while ago that was heavily redacted. Yeah. And then they unredacted a lot of it, kept some of it under wraps. And the new version of it, I think, is very telling and actually quite significant. So I think that there is an issue of over-redaction here. I do think it looks a little bit odd for the White House to wait 5 days and then say they've got a problem.
Marianne, I bet you agree.
On a Friday night. Yeah, of course. I mean, I think I would want to hear from the FBI and even the Department of Justice here about these redactions, not just from the White House. The other possibility here is, remember, it was a 10-page memo with lots of footnotes. Maybe this was just too effective at rebutting what Devin Nunes put out. So I think it's a bad look for the White House. It's a bad look for Devin Nunes. I think the Democrats, one way or another, will make sure that information gets out there. But I think we have to be really careful, seriously, about sources and methods. Well, I'm talking about sources and methods here. Everyone's sort of blithely saying we should do it no matter what. We can't, because it becomes increasingly more difficult as we go forward, whether people will trust us with information from around the world, our allies in this country. You don't want to put sources and methods out there. And I think we still have to see whether that's the real reason this memo's not coming out tonight.
You know, there was a suggestion. I interviewed Congressman Gowdy, and we talked about this earlier in the week, and he suggested that the Democrats, I think he said, were smart enough, I think that was part of his quote, to put things into this memo that would make it difficult to release, and that would make the White House potentially look bad for not releasing it. Molly, what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, that is, the Democrats were very open about doing that and having that be part of their strategy, I think in an attempt to keep the other memo from being released initially. If you keep reading that letter that you read, Martha, the last paragraph says that the executive branch will help the Democrats on this committee come up with a version of their letter that includes all of the meat that they want to have in there, but none of the sensitive issues that can't be brought to light. So I think this might be an area where we can all come to agreement that they will get a memo out that makes their case about Russia collusion, and I think that's a fair thing that they get to make without compromising all of this national security.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember
how
the 5-day thing worked the last time around, because I think it was if the president didn't rule on it, then Congress had the ability to decide to release it. So essentially, the president could say it can't be released. So he could potentially punt it back to Congress and say to the committee, release it or don't release it.
Well, that's actually what's happened now. So it's the same process. It was 5 days. It was on a Friday of last week in the same way. And that's why that last paragraph is really key. They are encouraging them to keep working on a version of the memo that can be made public. So that level of transparency is good to hear. It's not just that they get shut down. They get to come on, they get to try again, but without hurting the sources and methods that they filled that memo with as an attempt to kind of thwart the whole process.
Marianne, what do you think about the charge that Democrats kind of stuffed this with a lot of classified information to make it look bad if it wasn't released? If the White House didn't release it, then they could say, see, you let the GOP memo out, but not the Democratic one.
I think the bigger concern here, Martha, is, look, I haven't seen the memo. No one here has. But I don't think that's the case. But let's say that's true. I think the bigger concern here is that both parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, are constantly giving information now to the White House. So they now know the information that both parts of the committee are dealing with. And in many ways, it's helping them make their case and build their defense. So I think the fact that I read Molly's assertion that the White House offering to help the Democrats write this memo, it looks a little more nefarious than maybe she presented. And I think that's the real problem here, is now you're helping the White House all the way along.
Look, you know what? The bottom line is I think the American people want to know whether or not this process worked the way it's supposed to work. and whether or not they were provided with the right information that would give them the ability in the FISA court to assess whether or not this kind of surveillance had a grounded reason. And that, in the end, that's what the American people want to know. They want to know if the DOJ and the FBI are slanting the political picture, if they're putting their thumb on the scale during an election in order to release information that's bad about one candidate. So, I mean, in the end, that's what really matters here, Guy.
Yeah, and look, I actually want to see the Democrats' rebuttal to this.
Yeah, I think everybody does.
I want to see the information that they're bringing to the table. But if they're going to do it in a way that compromises national security in a way that the Republican memo did not, that has to be dealt with ahead of time. Get the DOJ and Adam Schiff in a room, hammer it out, and make it work. Yeah. I don't think we have to cast aspersions on the White House here. There are two parties that can get this done, and they should.
Quick thought, I'll go to Molly on this. The second person who is leaving the White House, it seems like these Me Too moments, when they happen, everybody thinks they're happening somewhere else. When they happen in your own workplace, it tends to be very different. People have a lot of different takes on it. Now the second person, Mr. Sorensen, is also out. Quick thought.
Well, I know absolutely nothing about that, but I do think the White House needs to balance its messaging and make sure that it shows empathy for women or others who are hurt by domestic violence, while also not prejudging situations, and that's key too.
All right, we got to leave it there. Thanks, you guys, for handling all of these breaking stories tonight. Great to see all of you this evening. Have a great weekend. So that's the story for tonight. It's a jam-packed one, as you can tell. Have a great weekend. Tucker Carlson is up next.